Welcome to Fishing Discoveries.
This is the second part in what's going to be 3-part series. If you missed episode 1, just look around on the page where you're watching this from. We no doubt have put a link somewhere to episode 1. I do recommend it's only 10 minutes or so, just have a quick catch up on that before getting on with this. But for those who've watched it, what have we got in this episode, Paul?
Well, we're talking about reliving some of the experiences, particularly this most recent season, that have been so fantastic, delving into some of the traditions of wet fly and finding out that actually a lot of this stuff that's considered historic and maybe old hat has a lot of relevance in the modern sort of angling repertoire of people that enjoy fishing on rivers particularly.
Yeah. The similarities between old tactics and modern competition-bred tactics. Paul's fond of the phrase, the triangle of awesome. And I can no doubt stick a picture of that on screen.
I mean, if you followed any of our stuff before, it crops up regularly. But I think just winding back slightly, it was almost shocking to discover some of these modern pillars of the most up-to-date, cutting-edge competitive methods of fishing on rivers, but still finding those in these traditions. But I use that word tradition quite advisedly because it turns out there's a lot of literature out there about it, but it's not something that's in the conversation very commonly with modern anglers. And I think in many ways there's this huge resource, but we've sort of forgotten where we've come from. And so we're kind of accidentally rediscovering things.
Well, I'd say, going straight off, missing the script completely, there's a modern myth, and it's mostly post-World War II, of shorter rods, let's say 7-foot to 9-foot rods, chucking a 4-weight with quite a short leader comparatively, straight upstream and just sort of bringing it back on the water. That's a very post-World War II sort of American import that's got almost no history in British fly fishing literature.
It's a very short blip. I mean, like Frederick Halford's favourite dry fly rod was 11 foot long.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of Halford, the dry fly Bible, upstream dry fly only sort of fans, 11-foot fly rod. It's not what most people picture, is it?
It's not, and you actually see quite a lot of all these newfangled long 10-foot rods, and it wasn't like that in my day and whatever else. And this is not traditional, but exactly. But that just steering things wildly back onto course. This idea that I get one of the most dominant forms of effective modern fly fishing is the stuff that's come out of the competition scene. Yeah. So whether you call it taut line nymphing or tactical nymphing or Euro nymphing or French leader fishing or whatever it is, we can all hopefully agree that there's a recognisable family of tactics that is really dominant in most of the most sort of up-to-date, most modern approaches that you see on rivers today.
Yeah. I suppose it's bred in the same way that traditional fishing methods, a lot of these methods historically were fishing for the pot.
Yeah.
It was about, feeding your family or at least, coming on with something to eat.
It's a method of necessity, You've got to get results. And the same thing applies in competition.
Yeah, if you don't catch fish, it's not that you don't eat, but you lose your place on the team. And, that's as important to some people.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. But I think that this idea that... you've got this sort of dominant family of techniques. It's worth pointing out that people possibly don't know this, but that has been our bread and butter for a long, long time, for much longer than the amount of time that we'd sort of started exploring some of the Japanese aspects that a lot of our other content is about. So that it gives us, let's say, sufficient insight to then actually, give ourselves permission to be surprised when some of these mechanics start showing up in stuff that people are writing in the 1800s. Which, when you say that out loud, it sounds kind of crazy. But that's the thing. It was we started discovering some of these mechanics, like, for example, let's list off some of the mainstays of these techniques.
The longer rods.
Yeah.
The comparatively light lines. When you look at the sort of, the recipes for the lines in some of this literature, they're not quite as delicate as a French leader, but they're certainly not like a fly line hanging off the end of the rod.
Well, the idea is with the length of the rod, you can hold it off the water as well. So even if you have a wind-cutting heavier line, it's going to be sort of held up off the water. So that brings us back again to that triangle of awesome thing.
The longer rod, the lighter line enables the triangle.
And for me as well, a big thing is favouring impressionistic and sometimes slightly exaggerated features on flies as well, not close copy.
Yeah,
So many competition anglers' boxes have got elements of like hyper
I was just going
exaggerated.
to say, if you look in a comp angler's nymph box,
Yeah.
nothing's got 6 legs in there.
No, but then again, this is so coming back to that. I don't know if you've got. I've probably got a better shot of this elsewhere, but you may
I
have
would
the
say,
GoPro.
yeah.
On it, but,
Well, I would say that's we can flash that up on screen. I've got a nice shot of that one.
but that is far from blending in to the background.
Yeah.
I would say, it happens to be dressed directly onto the tippet as well, which is there's another little.
I think we've got to mention somewhere about anti-camouflage.
Yeah.
In Cutcliffe, what did Cutcliffe refer to as conspicuity?
Conspicuity, he used the word,
it's
and it's basically the same thing. But I think we'll delve into that in a bit more detail later in the series.
I'm not familiar with that. I've never seen that in any other fly fishing literature. Certainly not as a sort of buzzword, let's say, conspicuity.
No.
If anyone out there has, drop us a comment in the comments section.
Yeah, this is a two-way process.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about it. But yeah, I mean, you particularly coined the term anti-camouflage. The most easy example of that any fly angler would recognise is hotspot.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's got a nice little hot spotted sort of body there, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and but the whole thing is advertising its presence, isn't it? And that is very much right within the middle of Cutcliffe's approach.
Another thing that's it's one of the best kept secrets in comp fishing. It's something we've seen in Japan a lot, but it's not something we've seen in sort of modern fly fishing, the upstream dry fly type things, which is active manipulation of the fly.
Yes. Yeah.
That's something that you see it in some of the North Country traditions as well.
Yeah.
But Cutcliffe was certainly on top of bringing life to the fly.
And it's not as if we've had a DVD about manipulations or anything, is it? So, it's something else that we recognised in his writing. He's talking about working the fly. It's not just about dead drift. When he does talk about dead drift, he emphasises not showing the flies to the fish for too long, to not let them have too long to make their mind up.
Yeah.
That's a very that rate of coverage and the pace of water coverage that you get with that's a very competition angling sort of street
the longer on the water, the more open you are to unrealistic looking drag.
Yeah.
So
worse your presentation is, the more likely you are to swipe your rod over the fish, spook them, that kind of thing. So lots and lots of these. So when you take all this together, once you can get through the language a little bit with a little bit of translation, you start to see that this guy Cutcliffe had an incredibly high angling IQ. You might hear it talked about in the fight game, fight IQ and this sort of thing. And it is that kind of street smarts, real hard-won, practical application of this knowledge. This guy could fish for sure, and that's been absolutely proven to us both through his writing and then with the experiments that we've done on stream. He understood about when to shout and when to whisper, that sort of background noise and all that kind of thing. And we'll get into that. But suffice to say, really, that applying his knowledge and his tactics and his flies has produced some wonderful experiences this last season for us, which has just been amazing.
It wasn't a dumber either, was he? It's kind of like that sort of Victorian, almost Renaissance man kind of character where he.
I think you'd be annoyingly brilliant at anything he tried to do. Because he was a surgeon.
Yeah.
From his fly tying, he didn't use a vice, so he was obviously very deft. Obviously, if you're stitching people up, inside somebody's body cavity, then you'd hope that they could have a degree of manual dexterity. But it's just astonishing, really, that he actually found the time to write a book about fly fishing because he had a career as a medic. He went to Guy's. He was born in a part of Devon, quite a rural part of the country. He came from some means. Don't get me wrong. His family was well off. But the dedication and his list of achievements in his career are quite astonishing. He spent most of his life in Bengal, when his working life at least.
I would put it out there that if his life had not been tragically cut short, we'd probably have more literature to draw from. I suspect there would have been more books.
Yeah, I think you'd see more contributions.
Yeah.
But I think what I can take from that is, one, we were lucky that we had this angling intellect. We're double lucky that he managed to actually somehow find the time in his life to actually write it down so that we could actually have, these experiments. And then finally, just actually discovering it and finding people that were also interested in him and his life as a small group of people. So there's this kind of hidden history, secret history, And then actually going about and playing with that on stream, it's like being a member of a little secret club, and it's just been wonderful. But the overriding feeling is just gratitude and thanks that we were lucky enough that all of those planets aligned and we actually had this resource to work from. It's
Well, it's a
fantastic.
strange one, isn't it? We talked in the last episode about Adam Rieger in the States, but we had a nice sort of, round in a circle back to the States when you mentioned Cutcliffe's flies and John Shaner's name popped up.
Yeah,
It got-
and that man Robert Smith again. So it's all
Yeah,
kind of like a
yeah,
deeply
yeah.
incestuous sort of thing.
Yeah. John had a collection of Cutcliffe flies, but they weren't tied by Cutcliffe.
No, but that was the shocking thing, was that we couldn't find any pictures of these flies. We couldn't, we had to deduce what they looked like from the written word. There's no pictures in Cutcliffe's book. I've not been able to find any photos of the man himself, for example, even though doing quite a lot of research on him. So when somebody comes up and says, "Oh yeah, I've got a collection of his flies," you think that. Gotta be bullshit. That can't be. That's too perfect. It's too scripted and too film-like.
They were tied in probably the 1930s, from, as far as we can gather, and really not too far down the road from us either.
No, and the fellow who tied them, he was a professional fly dresser from the Derbyshire, Staffordshire border, right in our neck of the woods. He was born about 4 years after Cutcliffe died young. So they didn't quite overlap, but it's kind of, the world hadn't moved on a massive amount, in that time in terms of methods and tying and such like. So Roger Woolley, who is the fly dresser in question, he tied in hand as well. So he didn't use a vice, which is a nice connection to Cutcliffe.
It's just the same, and we have some, quite a few pictures now of Roger Woolley's flies, both from a museum exhibit nearby, and from John Shaner's collection.
I think that's what we're going to get into in the next episode.
Yeah.
So we've hopefully given you a flavour of our experiences and the success that we've had with the flies and the recreations and the reconstructions of the methods as well as the flies. Next episode, we're going to look a little bit more closely about, the John Shaner collection of Roger Woolley's Cutcliffe flies. If you can draw the Venn diagram for that.
If your appetite has been whetted by any of this sort of old literature that we've discovered from Cutcliffe and the little connections out there to different fly tyres and its patterns, we've got something big for you in the next episode. So remember to sign up for notifications, look for links on screen if you want to know more. But for now, in this episode of Fishing Discoveries, it's goodbye from Paul and it's goodbye from myself.